73-year-old man returns from a routine doctor's appointment to find his front door lock has been changed. His own son stands on the other side of the door and tells him through the wood that he no longer lives here. His furniture is already gone, moved to a storage unit without his knowledge or consent. What the son does not know is that his father installed hidden cameras in every room of that house 6 months ago, after the first sign of betrayal. And right now, that footage is being downloaded by an attorney who is preparing a home invasion charge that carries up to 99 years in prison. This is the story of a father who trusted his son with the keys to his own life, who handed over access to his home, his belongings, everything he spent 6 decades building, because blood is supposed to mean something. But trust is a fragile thing when money gets tight and when someone convinces themselves that what belongs to you should really belong to them. The father's name is Robert. He is 73 years old, a widower living alone in the house he paid off 30 years ago. And his son, the one who changed those locks, is about to learn that paranoia can be a survival instinct when you have lived long enough to know how people really operate. What happened next would test every definition of family loyalty, and it starts with a single question. How do you prove that your own child stole your home? Robert bought that house in 1992 when his son Mark was just 8 years old. It was a 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, with a yard big enough for a swing set and a basement where Robert planned to build a workshop. He and his wife Diane had saved for 12 years for the down payment. Every penny of it came from overtime shifts at the factory where Robert worked as a machinist and from Diane's part-time job at the county clerk's office. They painted the living room together on a hot July weekend, argued over the color of the kitchen cabinets, and finally settled on white because Diane said white never goes out of style. That house was not just a building, it was a monument to everything they had built together. Diane passed away in 2020 after a long battle with lung cancer. Robert was 69 years old. He had retired 2 years earlier, expecting to spend his 60s traveling with his wife, maybe fishing in Canada, maybe just sitting on the porch watching the neighborhood change. Instead, he spent 18 months as a full-time caregiver, learning how to administer morphine, how to change bed linens with someone still in them, how to keep his voice steady when he told her everything was going to be okay. When she died, the house became a museum of her absence. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Her reading glasses remained on the nightstand. Robert could not bring himself to move anything because moving anything would mean accepting that she was not coming back. Mark, his son, was 38 at the time. He had a wife named Jenna and 2 children, ages 6 and 4. Mark worked as a sales manager for a medical supply company. Jenna stayed home with the kids. They lived in a rental house on the other side of town, a property that was always just a little too small, a little too cramped, a little too expensive for what it was. Robert visited often. He helped with the kids. He paid for pizza on Friday nights. He never asked for anything in return, but he noticed things. He noticed the way Jenna's eyes lingered on the furniture in his living room, the solid oak dining table that had been in Diane's family for 3 generations. He noticed the way Mark talked about his paycheck, the stress in his voice when he mentioned the rent was going up again. He noticed that the visits became less about seeing him and more about asking how he was doing, followed by a long pause that seemed to expect an answer he was not ready to give. The first real sign came in February of 2022. Mark and Jenna showed up on a Saturday afternoon with the kids. Everyone ate sandwiches in the kitchen. Then Jenna said, almost casually, that they were thinking about buying a house. Robert said that was great. Then she said they were looking at a property 2 streets over, a fixer-upper that needed a lot of work but had good bones. Robert nodded. Then Mark said the thing that changed everything. He said, "Dad, we were wondering if you might consider selling us this house. It's paid off. You're here alone. We could all be closer. The kids could have their own rooms." Robert felt something cold settle in his chest. He said he would think about it. He said the same thing he always said when he needed time. But he knew, even as he said it, that this house was the last thing he had that still belonged to him and Diane. Selling it would be like selling her memory. Over the next 3 months, the pressure increased. Mark called twice a week, always with the same question. Had he thought about the offer? Jenna sent him links to senior living apartments with notes that said, "You would have less to worry about." She mentioned that the fix-upper had fallen through, and that they really needed more space. She mentioned that her parents were getting older and might need to move in with them someday, so a bigger house would be essential. Robert listened. He said nothing. But he started writing things down in a small notebook he kept in his nightstand drawer. Dates, times, exact words. He did not know why he was doing it. He just knew that the feeling in his chest was not going away. In May, Robert received a letter from a mortgage company. It was addressed to him and Diane. Inside was a pre-approval application, already filled out with his name and social security number. Someone had submitted an inquiry to check his credit. He called the company. They told him the request came from an online portal associated with an email address he did not recognize, Mark's work email. Robert did not confront him. Instead, he called a locksmith and had the locks changed on all 3 exterior doors. He told no one. Then he went to an electronics store and bought 4 small cameras. They looked like smoke detectors. He installed one in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, and one in the basement workshop. He connected them to his home Wi-Fi and set the recordings to save directly to a cloud account. He did not tell Mark. He did not tell anyone. The next month, Mark showed up alone on a Sunday. He said Jenna had taken the kids to visit her parents. He sat at the kitchen table and said, "Dad, I need to be honest with you. We are in serious financial trouble." He said they were behind on the rent by 3 months. He said the landlord was threatening eviction. He said if they lost the rental, they would have nowhere to go. Then he said the words that Robert would later replay in his mind 100 times. "If you won't sell us the house, at least let us move in with you temporarily, just until we get back on our feet. It would save us. It would save the kids." Robert looked at his son. He saw the same boy who had cried when his bicycle was stolen when he was 12. He saw the same man who had stood next to him at Diane's funeral and held his hand through the entire service. And he said yes. But he added conditions: a written agreement, a move-out date of 6 months, no changes to the house without permission. Mark agreed to everything. He signed the paper right there on the kitchen table. Robert filed it away with the notebook and the camera footage. He thought he was being cautious. He did not yet know how right he was. The first week was fine. The second week, Mark mentioned that Jenna's parents might need to stay for a few days. Robert said no. The third week, furniture started disappearing from the living room. The oak dining table was gone. Robert asked where it went. Mark said it was being refinished. Robert checked the cameras. The footage showed 2 men loading the table into a truck at 2 in the morning. Mark was standing in the driveway directing them. Robert did not say anything yet. He watched. He waited. He documented. 1 month later, on a Tuesday morning, Robert had a routine doctor's appointment for his blood pressure. He left the house at 9:30. He returned at 11:15. The key did not work in the front door. He tried the back door, same thing. He tried the side door, also changed. Through the window, he could see his furniture was gone. The living room was empty. The kitchen counters were bare. His bedroom door was standing open, and the bed was missing. And then he saw his son standing in the hallway, looking at him through the glass. Mark did not open the door. He just stood there, holding a piece of paper, and mouthed 3 words. Robert could read lips because Diane had been hard of hearing in her final years. The 3 words were, "You don't live here anymore." Robert stood on his own front porch, pressing the doorbell, knowing his son was watching him through the glass. Mark did not move. He held up the piece of paper again, this time turning it so Robert could read it. It was a typed document with a title at the top, Notice of Abandonment. Robert felt his knees go weak, not from fear, from the sheer audacity of it. He pulled out his phone and called the police. The dispatcher said an officer would be sent. He waited 23 minutes on the front steps, watching his son walk back and forth inside his own home. When the cruiser arrived, a young officer named Collins got out, looked at the situation, and asked Robert for identification. Robert showed his driver's license with the house address on it. He showed the deed he kept in his glove compartment for exactly this reason. Officer Collins walked to the door, knocked, and spoke to Mark through the closed door. Mark showed him the notice of abandonment, claiming that Robert had voluntarily moved out 3 weeks ago and that the property had been transferred to Mark as next of kin. Mark had a notarized letter. It was a forgery, but it looked real enough. Officer Collins returned to Robert and said, "Sir, this is a civil matter. I cannot force entry. You will need to take this to court." And then he left. Robert watched the police car drive away. He looked at his house, and saw his son standing in the living room window holding his mother's reading glasses. That was the moment something inside Robert shifted. He was not just angry anymore, he was calculating. He drove to a diner called Rosie's, 5 miles away, and ordered coffee. He opened his phone and pulled up the camera app. He had installed the 4 cameras with cloud storage, and they were still recording. He could see Mark and Jenna walking through the empty living room. He could see them opening his bedroom closet and pulling out boxes. He watched his son, his own blood, loading his mother's jewelry box into a trash bag. Robert zoomed in on the timestamp, 11:23 in the morning. The same time, he was standing outside the locked door. He called his attorney, a woman named Linda Hartwell who had handled Diane's estate. He told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Do not go back to that house. Do not confront him. Send me everything you have. The deed, the signed agreement from June, the camera footage. I will file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and a writ of possession. But Robert, I need you to understand something. What your son did is a crime. Changing the locks on a legal resident without a court order is an illegal eviction. Moving your belongings without consent is theft. And if we can prove he intended to permanently deprive you of your home, that rises to home invasion." Home invasion, the words hung in the air. Robert had heard the term before, mostly on the news, stories about strangers breaking into houses in the middle of the night. He never imagined it would apply to his own son. Linda filed the motion that afternoon. The court scheduled a hearing for the following morning. Robert spent the night at a motel off Interstate 71, a room with thin walls and a flickering fluorescent light. He did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about Diane. He thought about the oak tree in the backyard, the one they planted when Mark was born. He thought about how his son had turned into someone he did not recognize. At 8 the next morning, Robert arrived at the Franklin County Courthouse. Linda met him in the hallway. She looked serious. "I reviewed the footage," she said. "There is more, much more. Your cameras captured conversations. I want you to listen to something before we go in." She played a recording from the kitchen camera from 2 days earlier. Robert heard Jenna's voice. "He's not going to fight this. He's old. He'll just go to a home and we get the house. That's what my dad said." Then Mark's voice. "What if he calls the cops?" "Jenna, he already did. They said it's civil. We just need to hold the property for 6 months, then we can claim adverse possession. My cousin did it." Adverse possession, Robert had heard of it, squatters' rights. If someone occupies a property openly and continuously for a certain number of years, they can claim legal ownership. In Ohio, it is 21 years, but for family members, the rules are different. Mark and Jenna were banking on his silence, his age, his exhaustion. Linda looked at him. They were planning this from the beginning, the letter from the mortgage company, the pressure to move out. The written agreement you both signed gave them a foot in the door. They used that piece of paper to argue that you voluntarily vacated. But we have the cameras, we have everything. The hearing began at 9. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches and a ceiling fan that clicked with every rotation. The judge was a man named Warren Briggs, in his late 50s, with reading glasses perched low on his nose. Mark and Jenna sat on the opposite side, flanked by an attorney they had hired the day before, a man named Philip Vance, who specialized in real estate disputes. Mark looked rattled. Jenna looked defiant. Linda presented the case. The deed, the signed agreement, the change of locks, the notice of abandonment that Robert had never signed. She played the audio clip from the kitchen camera. The courtroom went silent. Vance objected, arguing that the recording was obtained illegally. Linda countered that the cameras were in common areas of Robert's own home, that he had a reasonable expectation to record in his own residence, and that Ohio is a one-party consent state for recording conversations where the person recording is a participant. Robert was the homeowner. He was not a participant in the conversation, but he was the owner of the property. The judge stopped both attorneys and said he would rule on admissibility later. He then asked Mark to take the stand. Mark walked to the witness box. He was sweating. The judge asked him, "On what legal basis did you change the locks to a property that is titled solely to your father?" Mark stammered. He said his father had given him permission to stay. He said his father had abandoned the property. He said he was just trying to protect the house. Judge Briggs leaned forward. "Mr. Anderson, your father's mail is still being delivered to that address. His voter registration lists that address." His driver's license lists that address, and we have video evidence of you loading his personal belongings into a truck at 2 in the morning. Does that sound like abandonment to you?" Mark did not answer. Jenna started crying in the gallery, not from remorse, from anger. Judge Briggs issued a temporary restraining order against Mark and Jenna, ordering them to vacate the property within 24 hours and to provide a written inventory of all items removed. He also ordered that Robert be allowed to change the locks again and that the police would enforce the order if necessary. But he said something else that Robert would never forget. "Mr. Anderson, I am also referring this case to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges, including burglary, theft, and unlawful eviction. The evidence presented today suggests a calculated scheme to deprive an elderly homeowner of his property. This court does not take that lightly." Robert walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that gave him back his home, but he knew it was not over. Mark had 48 hours to comply, and Robert still did not know where his wife's jewelry was, or the oak dining table, or his mother's china set. The inventory list that would arrive would be the next battle, and the criminal investigation was just beginning. That night, Robert returned to the motel. He did not go back to the house. Linda told him to wait until the sheriff served the order. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened the camera app again. The motion alerts were still active. He watched the empty rooms, the silent hallways, the front door that was now unlocked because Mark had left in a hurry after the hearing. And then he saw something that made him freeze. A figure crossed the living room feed. It was not Mark. It was not Jenna. It was a man Robert did not recognize, carrying a duffel bag, walking through his house like he owned it. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m., 6 hours after the judge's order. Robert watched the man on his phone screen walk through his living room like he was shopping for a place to live. The stranger stopped at the fireplace, ran his hand along the mantel, then pulled out his phone and took a picture. He disappeared into the kitchen, then into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Robert called Linda Hartwell immediately. She told him to call the sheriff's office and the non-emergency police line. He did both. The sheriff said they would send a unit. 20 minutes later, the deputy arrived. The footage showed the deputy knocking, the stranger opening the door, and a conversation that lasted 4 minutes. Then the deputy left. The stranger closed the door and walked back inside. Robert called Linda again. She made some calls. What she learned changed everything. The stranger was a man named Derek Cross. He was a real estate investor who specialized in distressed properties. Mark had signed a lease agreement with Derek Cross earlier that day, leasing the house for 12 months at a rate far below market value. The document had been notarized by the same notary who had notarized the fraudulent notice of abandonment. Mark had moved the last of Robert's belongings into a storage unit that morning, then handed the keys to Derek Cross. The lease was dated the same day as the court order. Mark had violated the order within hours of walking out of the courthouse. The deputy had been shown the lease. Since it appeared to be a valid signed agreement, the deputy determined it was a civil dispute and declined to remove Derek Cross. Robert was locked out of his own house for a second time, this time by a stranger who had a piece of paper saying he had every right to be there. Linda filed an emergency motion for contempt of court. She also filed a complaint against the real estate investor, arguing that he had knowingly participated in a fraudulent scheme. The hearing was set for 3 days later. Robert spent those 3 days in the motel watching his cameras. Derek Cross brought in a cleaning crew. They threw away Robert's remaining belongings, clothing, photographs, Diane's collection of porcelain dolls that had been in the family for 50 years. Robert watched it happen through the camera in the hallway. He watched a woman in yellow gloves pick up his wife's dolls and drop them into a black trash bag. He watched the bag being carried out the front door. On day 2, a locksmith arrived and changed the locks again. Derek Cross was making the property his own. On day 3, a for rent sign appeared in the front yard. Robert sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the live feed. The house was clean now, empty. The living room walls had been painted a pale gray. His furniture was gone. His memories were gone. The only thing left was the oak tree in the backyard, which he could see through the kitchen camera, and the cameras themselves, still recording, still sending footage to the cloud. Linda called him the morning of the hearing. "I have news," she said. "The prosecutor's office picked up the case. They reviewed your footage. They are filing charges against Mark for theft, burglary, unlawful eviction, and forgery. Jenna is being charged as an accessory, and Derek Cross is being investigated for criminal trespass and conspiracy. But there is something else." She paused. "Your cameras captured something we missed. The kitchen camera has audio. Derek Cross made a phone call yesterday. He said, and I quote, 'The old man is not coming back. I have a buyer lined up for cash. We close in 30 days. Robert, they were planning to sell your house.'" The hearing was in the same courtroom, same judge. Judge Warren Briggs had reviewed the new evidence. He did not hide his anger. He looked at Mark, who was sitting next to his attorney Philip Vance, and said, "Mr. Anderson, you were in this courtroom 48 hours ago. I issued a court order directing you to vacate the property and provide an inventory. Instead, you leased the property to a third party. You moved out your father's remaining belongings. You permitted a stranger to discard 20 years of personal property, and you did it all while knowing that I was watching." He turned to Derek Cross's attorney, who had shown up unannounced. "Your client is in possession of a property that does not belong to Mr. Anderson's son. The lease is void ab initio. I am ordering your client to vacate within 24 hours and to provide a full accounting of any property removed or damaged." Then Judge Briggs looked at Robert. "Mr. Anderson, I want you to know that this court takes elder exploitation seriously. You are not the first person to sit in that chair with a story like this, but you are one of the few who had the foresight to document what was happening. Your cameras have made this case. Without that footage, your son would likely have succeeded in taking your home. I am granting you a permanent order of protection against Mark and Jenna Anderson. I am also ordering Mark to pay restitution for the value of all items removed or destroyed. And I am referring the matter back to the county prosecutor for expedited criminal proceedings." Robert left the courthouse with 3 pieces of paper. The first was the order evicting Derek Cross. The second was the permanent protection order. The third was a referral for criminal charges. He drove to the house. The for rent sign was still in the yard. He pulled it out of the ground and threw it in the trunk. He walked to the front door. The key from before the first lock change did not work. He called a locksmith and waited. 20 minutes later, he was inside. The house was empty. Gray walls, clean floors, no furniture, no photographs, no Diane, no Mark, no nothing. The only thing that remained was the hole in the living room wall where the oak dining table used to stand. Robert stood in the middle of the room and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel for years. He felt defeated. He walked to the kitchen. The camera was still mounted on the ceiling, a small black disc that looked like a smoke detector. He reached up and removed it. Then he went to the hallway and removed the second camera. He removed the one from the basement. He took the last one from the living room. He placed all 4 on the kitchen counter and sat down at the empty space where his table used to be. He pulled out his phone and opened the cloud storage. He had hours of footage. The entire story, from the moment he installed the cameras to the moment Derek Cross walked in, was preserved. He started deleting the footage, not because he was hiding anything, because he did not want to watch it ever again. He deleted the files one by one, watching the thumbnails disappear. When he reached the last file from 2 nights ago, he paused. The thumbnail showed Derek Cross on the phone. Robert remembered what Linda had said about the buyer. He did not delete that file, he saved it. The next morning, a deputy called. Derek Cross had vacated the property and left a written statement. He claimed he had no knowledge of the fraud, that he had been shown a lease signed by the son and assumed it was legitimate. But the deputy said something else. "Mr. Cross mentioned that your son was not acting alone. He said there was a third party, a man named Gary, who had been advising Mark on how to handle the legal side. Do you know a Gary?" Robert did not know a Gary, but he had seen a name on the mortgage company letter from months earlier, the one that had been submitted with his social security number. The inquiry had come from an email address that contained the name Gary Morrison. Robert had never heard of him, but that name was about to open a door he did not know existed. He called Linda. She ran the name. Gary Morrison was a paralegal who had been disbarred from practicing law after a fraud conviction in 2018. He now operated a consulting business that supposedly helped families manage inheritance disputes, but his real business was something else entirely. He identified elderly homeowners with no immediate family support or with family members who were financially desperate, and he helped those family members legally or quasi-legally transfer the property. Mark had found Gary Morrison through an online forum. Gary had guided Mark through every step: the letter from the mortgage company, the forged notice of abandonment, the lease to Derek Cross. Gary had even recommended the notary. Linda filed a complaint with the state attorney general. The county prosecutor added Gary Morrison to the criminal investigation. Robert was now a witness in a case that had grown from a family dispute into a multi-person conspiracy to steal a home. And at the center of it all was a 73-year-old man sitting in an empty house, holding a camera, waiting for his life to feel like his own again. But the story was not over, because Derek Cross had left something behind: a business card stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. On the back, written in pen, was an address, a storage unit address. Robert drove there that afternoon. The unit was unlocked. Inside, stacked in boxes, were the things Derek Cross had not thrown away: Diane's jewelry box still intact, the china set, a box of photographs, and the oak dining table disassembled, leaning against the wall. Robert stood in that storage unit and cried for the first time since the funeral. He loaded the table into his truck. He carried the jewelry box to the cab. He drove home, assembled the table in the empty living room, and placed Diane's jewelry box in the center. Then he sat down and waited, not for anything specific, just to be home, because that is what the entire fight had been about. Not money, not revenge. Just the right to sit at his own table, in his own house, and remember his wife in peace. Robert sat at his oak table, Diane's jewelry box in front of him, and waited for the silence to feel normal again. But the silence was not normal. The house was stripped of 50 years of accumulated life. The walls were gray, the floors were bare, and every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, seemed louder than it should be, as if the emptiness was amplifying itself. 2 weeks later, the grand jury indicted Mark Anderson on 7 counts: burglary, theft of property valued over $20,000, unlawful eviction of an elderly person, forgery, perjury, criminal conspiracy, and home invasion. The home invasion charge carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Jenna was indicted as an accessory to burglary and conspiracy. Gary Morrison was indicted on 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of operating an unlicensed legal service. Derek Cross was charged with criminal trespass and receiving stolen property. The story made the local news. A segment titled "Son Locked Father Out of His Own Home, Hidden Cameras Caught Everything" aired on the evening broadcast. Robert's phone rang off the hook for 3 days. He did not answer. He did not want to be a symbol. He just wanted to be left alone. Mark's attorney filed a motion to suppress the camera footage, arguing that the recordings violated Ohio's wiretapping laws. The judge denied the motion, citing the one-party consent exception and the fact that the cameras were in shared or common areas of the home, not in private spaces. The footage was admitted as evidence. Robert testified at the preliminary hearing. He walked the prosecutor through the timeline: the mortgage inquiry, the pressure to sell, the agreement signed in June, the change of locks, the notice of abandonment, the lease to Derek Cross, the disposal of his wife's belongings. The prosecutor played clips from the cameras. The courtroom watched Mark and Jenna's faces as they heard themselves planning the scheme. Jenna's mother, who had been sitting in the gallery, walked out halfway through. Mark's defense attorney argued that his client was under financial duress and had made a series of terrible decisions, but never intended to permanently deprive his father of the home. He pointed out that Mark had signed a lease, not a deed, and that the house was never transferred. The prosecutor countered that the intent to permanently deprive was evident in the plan to sell the house to a cash buyer within 30 days. The judge agreed. The case proceeded to trial. 4 months later, on a cold January morning, Mark Anderson stood before Judge Warren Briggs and pleaded guilty to 3 charges: burglary, theft, and unlawful eviction. In exchange, the home invasion charge was dropped. The prosecutor agreed to a sentence of 5 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 3. Jenna pleaded guilty to a single count of accessory and received 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. Gary Morrison did not plead. He went to trial and was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, citing his prior fraud conviction and the predatory nature of his scheme. Derek Cross agreed to pay restitution of $12,000 for the property he had discarded, including the value of Diane's porcelain dolls, which could not be replaced. Robert received a check for $15,000 from the restitution fund. He used it to repaint the house. He chose the same colors Diane had picked in 1992, soft beige for the living room, white for the kitchen, pale blue for the bedroom. He bought a new couch, a new bed, a new set of dishes, but he kept the oak table. He kept the jewelry box. He hung the photographs back on the walls, the ones he had recovered from the storage unit. Life returned to a rhythm. He went to the grocery store on Tuesdays. He had coffee at Rosie's on Fridays. He mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings. The neighbors who had watched the drama unfold from their front porches now waved at him with a new kind of respect. He was the man who had fought back. But there was one thing left unresolved. Mark had asked to see him. Through his attorney, he sent a letter. It said, "Dad, I know you have no reason to forgive me, but I need you to know that I am sorry. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry for what I did to you. Sorry for what I did to Mom's memory. I was desperate and stupid, and I let someone convince me that you were the enemy. You were never the enemy, I was. If you can find it in your heart to visit me, I would like to tell you this to your face." Robert read the letter 3 times. He folded it and put it in the jewelry box next to Diane's wedding ring. He did not respond, not yet. A month later, he drove to the correctional facility in Mansfield. He sat in a visiting room with plastic chairs and a vending machine that hummed. Mark walked in wearing a gray prison uniform. He looked older. He looked thinner. He sat down across from Robert and did not speak. Robert spoke first. "I found something after you left, something I want you to know about." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. "Your mother recorded a video before she died. I found it in a box in the back of the hall closet. She must have hidden it. She knew she was going. She wanted to say goodbye." Robert had watched the video alone, late at night, sitting at the oak table. Diane appeared on the screen, thin, tired, but smiling. She said, "Robert, if you're watching this, I'm gone. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know you. I know you will carry this house on your shoulders. I know you will try to keep everything the way it was. But I need you to promise me something. Don't let the house become a prison. Don't let the past keep you from living. And if things get hard, if people disappoint you, remember that you are stronger than you think. You built this life with your hands. You can rebuild it." Robert played the video for Mark in the visiting room. They watched it together on a tablet, the sound low. When it ended, Mark was crying. Robert was not. He had cried enough. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fine," Robert said, "but I wanted you to hear her voice. She believed in family. She believed in second chances. I don't know if I believe in either of those things right now, but I am here. That is all I can give you today." Mark nodded. He wiped his face. "That is more than I deserve." Robert stood up. He put the USB drive back in his jacket. "I'll come again next month if you want." "I want," Mark said. Robert walked out of the prison into the February cold. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that promised snow. He got in his truck and drove home. When he walked through the front door, the house smelled like paint and coffee. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door, the same hook Diane had installed 30 years ago. He walked to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and sat down at the oak table. Diane's jewelry box was still in the center. He opened it. Inside, next to her wedding ring, was the folded letter from Mark. He left it there. He closed the box. He drank his coffee. The house was quiet, but it was his quiet, and that made all the difference. But the story does not end there, because 1 month later, Robert received a phone call that would reopen everything he thought he had closed. That phone call was from a woman in Arizona whose daughter had done the exact same thing, changed the locks, moved her belongings, claimed abandonment. She had found Robert's story online and wanted to know how to fight back. Robert spent an hour on the phone with her. He told her about the cameras, the notebook, the lawyer who believed him. He told her that the hardest part was not the legal fight. It was accepting that the person who hurt you was someone you raised. Call was the first of many. Over the next 6 months, Robert heard from 17 families in 12 states, adult children locking parents out, siblings forging deeds, grandchildren stealing inheritance before the body was cold. The patterns were always the same: financial pressure, manufactured emergencies, a sudden claim of abandonment backed by a piece of paper that looked official but was not. And in almost every case, the victim had no documentation, no cameras, no written record, no legal defense. Robert started a small, informal support group. He called it the Oak Table Group, after the dining table he had rebuilt. They met once a month at Rosie's Diner. Sometimes 5 people showed up, sometimes 15. They shared stories, resources, the names of attorneys who understood elder exploitation. Robert gave everyone the same advice he had followed himself: document everything, trust your instincts, do not let shame keep you silent. The broader implication is uncomfortable to face. According to the National Council on Aging, nearly 60% of elder abuse perpetrators are family members. 2/3 of those are adult children or spouses. Most cases never get reported. Most victims never fight back. Robert Anderson did. He fought because he had proof, and that proof came from a simple act of foresight that cost him less than $200. The lingering question is not whether his son will ever truly change. It is how many others are sitting in empty houses right now, locked out of their own lives, without a camera to tell their story. Robert still lives in that house in Columbus, Ohio. He still has coffee at the oak table. He still mows the lawn on Saturday mornings. And every time the doorbell rings, he checks the peephole before opening, not because he is afraid, because he learned something that no court could teach him. Trust is not a lock. It is an agreement, and agreements require more than blood to hold them together. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be sitting alone right now, wondering how to take back what belongs to them. Subscribe to stay for the next story, because the truth is, the people who hurt us most are often the ones we never saw coming.